the UNCRC, for example, I think it's Article 4 that talks about member states taking all the necessary legal, programmatic, financial actions to ensure that they allocate the necessary resources towards ensuring that children enjoy their rights. But that is actually not the case because of the issue of underfunding. And the result of this is that we have repeated, continued vulnerabilities towards children. Then secondly is the reduction of ODA, what we call the Overseas Development Assistance, and its impact on the available resources. We've seen in the past, let's just look at the last 5 years, for example, that resources have been dwindling at a very high rate. Our traditional donors are no longer funding programs, for example, on human rights or child rights. And the effect of that is that, again, we'll continue to experience the violations and that children will not continue to enjoy their rights. So this, therefore, leaves us with the question, how do we align ourselves to look at other sources of funding, and where are these other sources of funding? We cannot continue to rely on the ODA. And then number 3 is the increased vulnerabilities on children. This was discussed. I think all the people who've been talking here, looking at this from the perspective of health, child development, safety and security, safeguarding, FGM, child labor, wars, displacement, conflicts, the lack of access to social protection and essential services as a result of this. Then thirdly is the gendered impact of climate change. Now, climate change, when it comes to children, it affects children differently. The way boys experience it is very different from how girls also experience it. So this is one of those elements that we also need to think about. Now, Plan International, where I work, we've actually conducted a study on the gendered impact of climate change on girls and young women in the Sahel, and I'll be happy to also share that with you so that you go through some of the issues and the recommendations. So this is just a snapshot of the 4 countries in terms of the budget allocation vis-a-vis the demands, vis-a-vis the budget deficit. And when you look at the numbers, it's actually worrying. I just had a snapshot of this from the country perspective, but also resources from UNICEF, where they've actually done that kind of social analysis. Now, this slide is not just here to show us the numbers. It's actually supposed to inspire us to think about budget advocacy from your respective country, whether you're in Kenya, whether you're in Mozambique, Malawi, Guinea-Bissau, Zambia, and so on and so forth. So first of all, it's supposed to help us to put up a case on how do we allocate resources towards child rights to avert some of these risks. Number 2, where are these resources going to come from? Looking at the challenges I've just highlighted on the underfunding. Number 3, what then would happen if we continue to increase the allocation of those resources? Does it mean that we'll see a reduction on the impact or not? So that is why this slide is here. Then I've gone ahead just to do that analysis, and I've highlighted some of the key impacts for us to appreciate why it's important for us to advocate for those resources towards child protection and child rights in our respective countries. Now, this 4 is just an example. There are so many others. First of all, we have the limited management expansion. Case management, the systems, the structures we put in place when it comes to prevention, response, rehabilitation, and recovery, when you're talking about child protection in the context of climate change, very important for us. Number 2 is the reduced capacity to address child abuse and early marriage. This is an example from Malawi. So it means the numbers will continue to increase when it comes to that capacity. And capacity in this case includes the social workforce. I think our colleague from UNICEF mentioned this, and also the other presenters who talked about improving, coordinating the social workforce towards child protection to address the needs and the violations. Then number 3 is the inadequate child welfare program implementation. In child rights programming, we have different subsets that speak to each other. Monitoring and evaluation, research and learning, policies, the social welfare, child participation, and so on and so forth. And then number 4, from Zambia, the impact of having the budget deficits is that we have restricted delivery of core and broad child protection services. Those child protection services are at the core of ensuring that children continue to enjoy their rights. So this is just a summary from the presentation of the budgets in the countries and some of the impacts that children continue to experience. So I now want to talk about climate financing. Just an overview for us to understand, because we've talked about the impacts, we've talked about the risks, we've also talked about the violations when it comes to child rights. But we also need to find possible solutions. And these are solutions drawn from the global level to the regional level, all the way to the country level. And one of those solutions is actually financing. So this is where climate financing comes from. Now, just looking at the proportion, where does this money come from when you talk about climate financing? We already defined climate financing in the previous slides, and I mentioned that in climate financing, the focus is on where we allocate these resources towards mitigation and adaptation. So this is just a snapshot of where the money is coming from and the percentage in terms of share. The reason why the percentage is here is also to help us think about, one, we are all approaching these people and the resources are also dwindling. Number 2, we want to advocate for more allocation from these sources, but we also need to align ourselves to what these sources are doing when it comes to climate financing. So in summary, we have the multilateral development finance institutions. I'll go into details of this. Then we have the private finance. We have the bilateral development finance institutions. We have the governments. And I believe this is where probably most of us are. Just looking at the case in point for the countries I mentioned in terms of the demand versus the deficits and what is actually allocated. And then we have the UN agencies, we have the trusts and foundations, and we also have the others who include the individuals, the high net worth individuals, the philanthropists, and so on and so forth. So these are the examples of the current opportunities that we have for climate financing. And as I present this, I also appreciate that in this room, one, we have the UN agencies, we have development partners, we have grassroots organizations, we have those who work in form of like networks, we have civil society organizations, national organizations, research-based, and so on and so forth. So this is the basket of where all of us are actually trying to look for this money. And I said, as we think about these available opportunities, our interest here is on the rights of children. So the first question we need to be asking ourselves, and even based on the percentages I have shown you, when you get down to the details of the percentages, what actually goes down to child rights? What actually goes into child protection when it comes to mitigation and adaptation to avert the risks associated with climate change and the rights of children? So for the multilateral development banks, mostly they focus on renewable energy and green urban development. So the question then is, are our programs aligned to that? One of the things as I present on this is also to help us align to the fact that, one, we need to be compliant. Are we registered, number one? Are we recognized in terms of our work? Is our work known in terms of the impact, the resources that we have? What impact does it have when it comes to child rights and climate change? And then we have the UN and public development funds. We also have the private sector contributions So ask yourself in your country or in our countries, have we already approached the private sector, institutions, for purposes of climate financing when it comes to the rights of children? And what exactly have they done? Do they have corporate social responsibility programs? Do they have social programs, social infrastructure, and so on and so forth? And then we have the individuals and the individual and government roles. In this case, the individuals use crowdfunding and green products, and the government supports through the climate funds and stimulus packages. For example, in Kenya, I know we have the FLOCA program, financing for local organizations through the World Bank, and they use that opportunity to reach those organizations at the county and grassroots level, just to promote them in climate change activities and climate change design of programs. And then we have the multilateral development banks. As you can see, the numbers are there in terms of what they've been able to allocate. And basically, they focus on renewable energy, green cities, clean transport, water security. So when you look at the focus area, how is it then related to child protection? How is it related to generally the rights of children, and how can we also tap into those resources even through advocacy with our own governments to ensure we get those kind of resources. And then we have the UN agencies and initiatives. For example, you might have heard of UNEP-FI. This is the United Nations Environmental Program Finance Initiative that is helping institutions align with countries and national transition plans. And they basically, so for the UN, they would find a way to work with those organizations at the country level, and you can also find out how to approach them. We also have investment in climate resilience infrastructure, and I've just given examples, for example, in Mozambique, where they are doing adaptation projects in this kind of countries. Then lastly, we have the private sector. And the private sector, mostly their focus is on mitigation projects with high returns. For example, we have the clean energy, green technology. Mark was reminding us in the morning that we really need to think about innovation when it comes to climate change and how we can also use technology as part of programming around climate change. We have the trusts and the foundations, and then we also have the governments whose focus is on domestic public finance. And basically here is where we'd want to advocate and assess how much is the government of a specific country allocating towards climate change programs that are also child-friendly and focusing on the needs and the violations of children. So these are other examples of the opportunities that we can explore. We have the Green Climate Fund, and usually they have a call for proposals for adaptation and mitigation. We have the Adaptation Fund, the EBRD, UNDP, private sector, and so on and so forth. So basically, these are the opportunities that we need to start thinking about. How do we align ourselves? One, are we in the right networks where issues of climate financing are being discussed? How do we position ourselves in those networks? Through our own proposals, because it starts with developing proposals that speak to adaptation, mitigation, connecting child rights and climate change, and also being in a position where you can actually demonstrate impact for the work that you've already done. So what are the key messages? Just looking at this conference, looking at the topic, looking at the issues that have already been highlighted. Now, one of the key issues I'd actually want to mention is that, one, we already have existing frameworks. We have global frameworks, we have regional frameworks, national frameworks that speak to these issues when it comes to climate change and child rights. I want to talk about the UN General Comment number 26 that talks about child rights and the environment. It actually provides us with an opportunity to continuously advocate for the inclusion of the rights of children, one, in policies, two, in laws, three, in programs that are being designed and implemented by the governments, by civil society organizations, and so on and so forth. At the African Union level, they actually just released a guidance note on reporting when it comes to child rights and climate change. You can actually get this from the Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child for the African Union. And then, of course, from our different countries, we also have the laws and policies that can align to this. So one of the key things or key messages is on centeredness and child participation. I think this has been hammered into us, not just in this conference, even in previous settings, that we really need to consider the voice and the agency of children and young people when it comes to climate change, climate financing, adaptation, mitigation, and so on and so forth. So this is child participation and child-centeredness in the design of climate change, adaptation and resilience programs that address and take into consideration the vulnerabilities, gender transformation, violations, needs, and so on and so forth. So we cannot run away from the voices of children when it comes to child participation. And we actually applaud even the organizers of this conference for actually considering the voices of children in the same. Secondly is the innovative and sustainable climate finance programs. We need to think about innovative and sustainable climate finance programs that address the key issues at the grassroots levels, including the use of technology, for instance, innovation in early warning systems. I think I had Mark mentioning that in the morning. In early warning systems and response for climate mitigation. So for example, we've said the Overseas Development Assistance, ODA, based on research, is reducing by 20% by the year 2030. That is, how many years from now? That is 5 years from now, this is actually reducing. So what that means is that we need to think about creative ways of mobilizing for resources on climate financing with the lens of child rights at the back of our minds. We also need to think about local solutions for local problems or local needs and local violations, because we are implementing climate change programs at the grassroots levels. So we also need to think of, for example, do we approach individuals? How do we advocate with our own governments towards allocating resources? Then the other key message is on understanding the multi-vulnerabilities that children experience. Children experience climate change risks individually and also collectively. So that means we cannot run away from, one, documenting those experiences, number two, having and conducting research and using the research to inform policies, to inform programs, and to implement, especially where we have the gaps. So think about urban and refugee settings, how climate change plays out. For example, when you go to Mozambique, we have repeated cyclones. When you come to Kenya, it's probably long droughts, it's flooding. So what happens in that scenario? Then we have the repeated climate change risks, the lack of access to social protection services, hunger, drought, cyclones, and so on and so forth. And while understanding the multi-vulnerabilities that children experience, we also need to utilize a multi-sectoral approach that addresses the intersectionality between climate change, child rights, and climate financing. So multi-sectoral approaches here means we've been discussing, we've had people presenting on access to justice. Somebody presented on education, somebody presented on technology, another one presented on child and youth participation, another one talked about mental health and psychosocial support related to children and climate change. So as we are seated here, we also need to think about multi-sectoral approaches to addressing some of these risks and issues. And now the conclusion and call to action. In summary, I know there's so many things that we've all talked about, but one, there's need to advocate for allocation of resources by our respective governments towards the national adaptation plans. I remember when Alana was giving her speech, she talked about this, and she even went to break it down and said that we also need to look at this from the national plans that our governments are developing when it comes to climate change with a focus on children. And then we also need to integrate these national adaptation plans and the resources to the national climate policies and national laws and policies with a focus on children. So in most cases, we might look at climate change, but omit the child rights aspect into it. And I believe that is why we are all seated here as experts when it comes to issues related to children. And then this is also a call to action for the government to create an enabling environment for resource mobilization. So issues such as taxation, how does taxation affect us? You've mobilized resources, but then on the other hand, there's overtaxation. So when there's overtaxation, probably the resources are not reaching the intended beneficiaries, even at the grassroots levels. So creating an enabling environment for resource mobilization in view of private sector funding, just as an example, where the private sector would come in with incentives to promote development work. And we are saying, looking at the 20% by 2030, the overseas development assistance is actually reducing. So we need to think of creative ways of mobilizing resources for climate change and child rights. Number two is alignment to and implementation of global, regional, and national frameworks on climate change and child rights. So we need to align research, assessments, baseline, the impacts of climate change. We already have the frameworks, and I just mentioned a few, and what they offer when it comes to child rights and climate change. Then number three is allocation and increased budget allocation. So there's allocation, number one, and then increasing that budget allocation towards child protection that should integrate child rights and climate change in its policies and the design and implementation of programs. So we also need to start thinking about local solutions to the local issues that we have. And actually these local solutions come from ourselves, including the voices of children. And then lastly is private sector engagement. And for here is just advocating for corporate social responsibility, development of social infrastructure, focusing on skills development, emergency and humanitarian response when it comes to climate change and the crisis that arises out of it. So this is what I had for you. I beg to end there. Thank you for your time. I've seen some of you taking photos, others are taking notes. I believe some will be able to share this PowerPoint to all of you. In case you have any other questions and you'd also want to interact outside of this, I'm also happy to engage people.
Wow. That was profound. You did justice to this, Pauline. I was glued to listening throughout, and I can tell you that you did justice to this sub-theme. Thank you very much, and we are getting to the Q&A section. But before that, out of what she has said, because she has talked about so much in climate and financing, and we hear the many gaps that are there, even in the budget deficits in the different countries. And other than that, the consequences of those budget deficits in the different countries. We've also heard about what we need to do and where we can leverage to get the financing to child protection and climate change despite the deficits. And the call to action is clear to us all that we need to advocate for allocation of resources by our national governments and international ones. We have to align the global, the national, and the local frameworks to climate change and child protection. We also have to not just allocate, but also increase the budget allocation that integrate child rights and climate change. And the last one, not the least, is to engage the private sector in the financing of child rights and financing. What a presentation. I want to allow us to ask questions in regard to the presentation. You can raise your hand, and I believe somebody will be there to give you the microphone. Any question? There's one there at that corner, and another one here. Kindly give them microphones.
Thank you, Pauline. That was really nice. Issues financing are not the easiest to discuss anywhere. And when we are talking about
policy around budgeting, that is even more difficult as you're engaging policy makers who might not necessarily have
view that you have on matters, child protection, for example. Maybe that's not their background at all. So for you to effectively engage in that space, there are things you need to do before you get there. So based on your experience and exposure and looking at the different countries, what would you recommend as the practical actions we can do at our level, which then builds the momentum before we reach the policy makers impactfully? Because I will not just get out of my house this morning and show up somewhere and be talking about financing
for climate change or child protection. There's some things we need to do. So what are those practical things we should do to build our collective, position
for it to be impactful and for change to actually take place? Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline, for the good presentation. It was very educative. I can assure you, even those at the back have benefited, including myself. Pauline, it was a nice presentation, but the focus is on lobbying other than on the community and the child. Kindly shed light on what the community can do. Because when it comes to financing, you talked of the grassroots. So, and there are a lot of things that the community can also do. Kindly shed light on this. Secondly, you mentioned FLOCA, and I've not seen the element of child protection in it. I don't know whether, because it's one of the funding opportunities that are currently existing in Kenya. And FLOCA program, we have not been involved as child protection sector. Is there something that has been put on board? Because you mentioned FLOCA. Kindly shed light on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe before Wilson asks the other question, I wanted also to ask this question, Pauline. We now have two things here, child protection and climate change. And is it climate change that is more important than child protection? Or is it that if we invest more in child protection, then we are able generally to cover the negative effects of climate change. I'm saying this because already in Kenya, even the child protection budget is that 0.01, the way we always say. So will we still be able, even
on something around where the children in the space of climate action, I mean, where is the nexus? And at the end of the day, it will all lead us to inclusion. Where are their voices? Where are they when we are developing the early warning, early action science systems, sorry. Because these are the tangible, practical activities that she mentioned that we need to practically undertake, okay? So the message home is that I think it will be good for us to actually invest so much in co-creation, have grassroots organizations, have representation of caregivers, including children with disability. I think I never heard that being mentioned. So maybe I may have missed it out, but we also have children with disabilities. Again, we need their inclusion in this. The other key important thing that I just want to mention is that we can actually have small wins based on our structural composition. I know different governments have got different structures. We can start small, have based on lessons learned in Bungoma in a project, in a resilient project that we're implementing, have children trained through directorates of climate change, county directorates of climate change as champions, okay? So that this can also be embedded within the education sector. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Pauline. Maybe not a question, but just a few reflections. First, on the difficulties of tracking the funding to child protection. I mean, UNICEF and different organizations have tried to understand how we can calculate what is going to child protection sectors. And it's not like the Ministry of Education where you take all the money that goes to the sector of education. Child protection goes to, you know, the Ministry of Justice, to Ministry of Interior, to Ministry of Social Affairs. And first, I think that's very, very complicated, and it's even more complicated when it goes to those global funding mechanisms. So, I mean, I think my first reflection on that is that we should probably, advocacy more focusing on funding that goes to children and to the broader child rights agenda of children, and then advocate for, because I mean, if you it's going to be much easier to advocate for funding that goes to education or things like that, and that will have an impact on child protection, because if we've got a safe school, if we've got children in school, that's going to impact child protection. So I think we need to be a bit careful in taking that direction. The second one is on the tools we are using. I mean, you were referring to a few countries. Budget is not at all a very good way to, I mean, what is seen as budget versus expenditure is often where we lost our analysis, because the budget, we could have I mean, we've got many countries where you've got 1% of the budget that goes to the Ministry of Social Affairs in charge of child protection, but when you track down the expenditure, in fact, there are many things happening that shows that at the end there's only a tiny percent of that is going. So again, it's very, very complicated to do that. Then maybe the last reflection, what I can see, when we try to see when we try to find resources for child protection programming at the moment, what I see increasingly as a concern also internally is that more and more funding are targeted to migration, you know? Because there is an agenda, you know, there is an agenda, there is security, there is a migration. And I think something that we need to advocate for is, of course, to make sure that when it comes to the impact of climate change and migration, this is seen from a human rights perspective and not a security perspective, you know, because behind that it's how do we prevent people to move? That's and also how do we start also to unpack when money when funding are going to child rights, how do we unpack the target? Because if we've got 90% of the funding of the ODA that is going to try to address migration, this is only covering a tiny aspect. So no question, just a reflection. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all for your feedback, your added contributions, and also the questions. So I'll try and merge my response based on what you've asked. So yes, money issues are usually hot issues, and usually where the money is where your allegiance is in most cases. It's also a way of demonstrating where the priorities are. So first of all, it's not that climate change is more important than the rights of children. We just need to find a way to integrate. As we're looking at child rights, as we're looking at climate change, as we're looking at the impacts and the risks associated with climate change, how can we integrate the two? Number two, what opportunities are there for us to collaborate? The resources are reducing. We need to think of collaboration more than competition amongst ourselves. So when it comes to budget advocacy, from a practical perspective, and I know some of us have probably done this in a number of years, the language that most of our governments understand is, this is the evidence I have for you. So if you're advocating for allocation of resources or increase in those resources, one, we need to do some kind of simple analysis and also demonstrate the impact. If you're not allocating the resources, then this is the result of that. If you allocate the resources and you probably increase by a certain percentage, this is how that improves, contributes to improving on the rights of children. So one, we need to approach the government with the language of evidence. It has to be evidence-based advocacy, and this also includes how the grassroots organizations can actually come to the table. Our colleague has talked about involving the children, involving the communities during the early warnings, the early warning when you're designing the programs as well, because at the community is where we face that impact. It's actually where we experience the day-to-day realities when it comes to climate change and climate crisis. Agenda at the community level, at the grassroots level. We need to demonstrate why it's important that when there's a flood and a child is not going to school for 20 days, this is what it means. They're probably going to be lured into child labor. There's displacement. Potential conflicts might arise. Other child protection issues such as FGM, child marriage, are likely to happen during that period of time when the flood has actually taken place. So the grassroots organizations also need to support or contribute to setting the agenda of the importance of this and also demonstrate the impacts. Secondly is the design of climate change programs with a focus of the rights of children. Our brother has talked about FLOCA and is wondering whether the issues of children are actually considered. FLOCA, as an example, is basically supposed to target local organizations that already have programs designed on climate change and how they're addressing some of those risks. Of course, the funding is through the support of the World Bank. So then it means, one, we need to be compliant. Are we registered organizations? Are we known? Number two, are we in the necessary available networks where these issues are being discussed? Then there's also the element of capacity building. Yes, those structures or those other government entities might not understand child rights the way we'd want them to do it. So we also need to offer that technical support, whether through training, sensitizations, and so on and so forth. The issue of inclusion. Inclusion in this case covers the gender, the age, the sex, disability, geographical locations, and so on and so forth. So even as we are designing the programs, even as we are advocating for resources to be allocated, we also need to be alive to the issues of inclusion. And then lastly, on tracking expenditures, on tracking funding, what has been allocated, we also need to have evidence for that. And yes, I agree, the tools are there, but sometimes it's also very difficult. But we've had scenarios where we actually have people who understand how to do this analysis, and they're also able to provide us with the technical support in terms of just identifying what are the lessons we can learn from this. How can we allocate the resources? What percentages would actually make sense for us when it comes to child rights, climate change, and so on and so forth. Then lastly, the voices of the children. So in everything that we do, we are here for the children, and we are also working with them. So ensuring that the voice and the agency of children is included in climate financing, but also in the design and the implementation of climate change programs. So that's the feedback and response I have. I hope I've answered the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you so much. You can keep clapping for her. She gets down the stage. Thank you very much. And you were able to really keep within your time. We are in our second session. Thank you very much, Pauline. And thank you for your questions. And we want to have our second keynote this day. Our second keynote today is Gloria Makawi from Zimbabwe. As I introduce her, she could mount on the stage. Gloria is a gender and advocacy officer at Women and Land in Zimbabwe, holding an MSc in Gender and Development Studies, and she advocates for women's land rights, wetland, and biodiversity protection and sustainable watershed management. She represents Southern Africa rural women in regional and international forums to promote gender equality in environmental management. And she's here today to speak to us about the integration of child protection into climate-responsive health, nutrition, and mental health services. So let's clap for Gloria as she gets to speak to us regarding this. You can do better than that. Yeah, welcome, Gloria. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Jane, for the beautiful introduction. Good morning, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Gloria. I work for Women and Land in Zimbabwe. I hold the portfolio for policy and advocacy, and my work spans around representing the ideas of women and children, coming from an understanding that we cannot divorce women from children. They go hand in hand. So I'm glad that I'm presenting after her. She has talked about money, and I'll be talking about things that we can do without money as communities, as families, as individuals, to ensure that we support each other in times of crisis. We'll start, my topic is integrating child protection into climate, responsive mental health. We talk about the nutrition of children, etc., etc. But before that, I want you to have those questions in mind. Where are we in terms of integrating climate responsive actions in our mental health support services, nutrition, and other health factors? And what are we supposed to do? And why are we having this discussion now? What has happened to us? What is happening to our society? Just to give you a background of what is happening, what is surrounding us. We have seen that climate change is disproportionately threatening the survival of children, their mental health, and also their right to development. And we have seen that despite having these challenges, we still have structures that poorly integrate climate responsive health and nutrition programs. And also we realize that key interventions that we have in terms of climate change, such as our nationally determined contributions and our national adaptation plans, they only have an element of acknowledging that we need to include children, but they don't really have statutes that prioritize safeguarding measures of children. I have done a small research, and I saw that with the previous NDCs that expired here, that is NDC 2.1.0, we have seen that it was Botswana and Zimbabwe in Africa that only mentioned about child safeguarding, but they did not go into deeper on how they are going to respond to the issues pertaining to children. So with such omissions, we realize that our responses to children within an environment of increasing climate impacts falls short and rather increases the vulnerabilities of children to malnutrition, diseases, displacement, and psychosocial distress. Furthermore, we also realize that these omissions, they fail to align with the framework that is set in the COP27 agenda that emphasized a just transition that is child sensitive, and also it further widens the gap of protection for our children. We also realize that we are continuously expanding the use of fossil fuels, which really intensifies climate-related crises and events, increasing as well the rising levels of hopelessness and anxiety and distress among our children. I also felt that I can bring into the space evidence of what happened to us as Zimbabwe, and we experienced Cyclone Idai in March of 2019, where according to UNICEF, they discovered that the large-scale displacements that happened had an impact on our WASH, education, child protection, and also nutrition, where we had thousands of children who required protection services and immediate response. Zimbabwe is in Southern Africa, and it's just not Zimbabwe, but we can talk of Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. They experienced the same cyclone, and we are sitting along the lines of the cyclones, and also we experience both extreme weathers, where we have, at some point, we have floods and cyclones, and also we also experienced droughts. So in 2024-25, we also had induced droughts, and in that same year we were having a drought, but we also experienced a cyclone. Imagine what that does to the systems and the safety of children. Studies show that cyclone worsened nutrition outcomes among women and children under 5 in affected districts. And extreme weather, which is cyclones and the droughts, they also services, increase security, disease outbreaks, and also elevate the risks of family separation and violence against children. We also have studies showing that Cyclone Idai worsened nutrition outcomes among women and children under 5 in the affected districts, of which I come from one of them, that is in Manicaland. These extreme weather situations, they amplify the risks of malnutrition, waterborne diseases, and family separation in rubble. And the children had to save their friends. They had to spend the whole night with shovels, trying to dig for their friends. And because they were disconnected from the other world, help could not come early. They spent 3 days with a dead corpse of their friend, and they also didn't have food to eat. Imagine what that does to your mental status. So, having such tragedies, having that evidence in mind, what does it tell us? What lessons do we draw from that? Realize that the tragedy revealed our weaknesses in terms of our protection systems as a country, as a province, as a district, as a community, and as a family. And we realize that there is need to integrate child protection, nutrition, and health into disaster preparedness and adaptation. We had never thought about that. But after this, we realized that we need to be prepared. And also, we realized that we need to prepare our schools to be resilient and also to have safety procedures. With the droughts, we also realized that children go through malnutrition, stunting growth, and also rising school dropouts, child marriages, as families also struggle economically. Cholera also comes in when we also have the droughts because of the water scarcity. And it also increases distress among children as they have to walk longer distances to fetch water, especially in the evening because they have to go to school. They then have to go and fetch water for domestic use. So we realized that systematically we have gaps in terms of our failure to operationalize agreements of COP27, and this actually perpetuates the challenges that children were already facing, because we are talking about children who already have other vulnerabilities without climate change. So we realized that we need, we were not coordinating as government ministries, as traditional leaders, as also partners, development partners. Our approach to this disaster was fragmented, each individual going to do what they are doing or going with a certain thematic area. And it was like we were repeating the same interventions, which did not yield so much impact, and it further increased the children's vulnerabilities. So, such a background highlights that we need to be prepared and to adopt a whole of society planning way as a way of shifting from reaction to being active or preparedness. We had to react because we were faced with a disaster, but we felt that we needed to be prepared and to adopt a whole of society where we come together, put our ideas together, and map a way forward. So what did we do after that? We then began on a journey to activate child protection and health clusters with joint preparedness plans and agreed referral pathways to say, when we have a disaster, where do we start and how do we go about it? Who does respond first and who does what? We also adopted the use of planning, health adaptation planning, where we embedded child protection indicators in our national adaptation plan, and I'm glad that we did that with our NDC 3.0, we submitted this February. And we also, in our NAPs, we also made some adjustments to our national adaptation plans and other frameworks. We also realized that when we prepare for a disaster, we save more money, we save time, and we also save lives. So we thought that if we could have cash pre-positioned in the areas that we know there are certain disasters, and it also gives opportunity to say, to be very inclusive, because we will be prepared for what we want, to assist or to help those with special needs, like children with disabilities, children with specific gender needs. We also integrated services to reduce duplication of activities. By adopting a whole of society approach, coming together, having ministries talking to each other, rather than having the Ministry of Health coming in with their own response, Ministry of Education, we came together and spoke to each other to say, how can the Ministry of Education respond? How can the Ministry of Health respond? How can the Department of Social Services respond? And we allocate duties and lines of interventions. So, this coordinated approach by all actors, that integrated child-sensitive approach into climate health systems, was essential for us to protect our young and vulnerable from the deepening cycles of hunger, trauma, disease, and displacement. And also, as we renewed our NDCs and NAPs, we also reviewed and aligned it with the COP27 agenda and included explicit commitments to child safeguarding, mental health, and social protection. We also felt that we need to get to the bottom of what's happening to us. And we are embarking on a journey to endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty so that we also try and reduce the use of fossil fuels, which is the core of the climate crisis that we are experiencing. And we believe that every action that we do counts, and we feel the time to act is now. So, we believe that a just transition, we understand that this year we are talking about a just transition to energy use, and we believe that it should prioritize the needs of children. So we believe that if we engage the children holistically at all levels, and I want to thank the organizers of this conference for setting the tone, because I have seen children around. And so I believe that from this conference, we will have a coordinated approach by all actors that integrates child-sensitive approaches into climate and health systems, as this is essential to protect our young children from vulnerabilities and deepening cycles of hunger, disease, trauma, and displacement. In my call to action, I have highlighted a few pointers where I have talked about integrating child mental health support in schools, in disaster-prone areas, including providing funds for emergency preparedness, and also to pre-position funds as well as hazard mapping. It's important to do hazard mapping because it also helps us to then plan and see how best we can respond apart. So the Thompson tent is here, the Makawi tent is there. There is no privacy there. What are we doing? It's because we were not prepared for the disaster. But now that we know we are experiencing disasters, we can do hazard mapping and plan beforehand. We also need to strengthen the whole of society coordination approach. This has worked for us, and I believe it can work it can be replicated anywhere else, where we include the traditional leaders, the youth groups, the women's networks, health, nutrition, and protection actors, in trying to embed early warning systems, case management, and psychosocial support in our adaptation frameworks. I also felt that action and inaction are two things that can help us and not help us. We need to take action when we are asked to take action. And communities need to take action, especially when they are asked to evict, they are given eviction orders because there is an impeding disaster coming. Usually, it is give reasons. So, the implications of your inaction, of failing to evacuate, could be harmful to the children. It could cause harm to our children. And we should get to a point where we are able to hold each other accountable for either action or inaction. If communities fail to evacuate, the government should be able to hold that community accountable for their inaction. And if the government fails to act on something, the communities should be able to hold the government accountable. So I think that's key in knowing our responsibilities and what we are supposed to do. I also pointed at our national climate policies. They should explicitly include targets and also budgets for child protection, mental health, and school-based nutrition interventions. Here I highlighted school because I believe we can have access to children when they are in school. And if we start with the schools, it also helps to embrace every child. We also need to invest in data systems that link healthy nutrition and protection for early detection and response. I think the issue of data has been overemphasized again at this conference, and I think it should also link us and provide us and guide us on what to do, because when we have the data, we are informed and we make informed decisions. I also believe that we have opportunities in the regional groupings that already exist. We have SADC, we have the EAI, we also have the AU to create harmonized frameworks to scale up investment in community-based protection mechanisms, school feeding, and mental health programs in climate vulnerable areas. And this goes beyond. We have other regional groupings that we can leverage on to then customize, to say, these are the disasters that are happening in such areas. What can we do? How can we customize them to suit our context, but to provide the necessary support to ensure that children are protected? Lastly, but not least, I also would like to take this opportunity and call upon the African Union to rally behind the agenda for a fossil fuels non-proliferation treaty and to call for funding to the loss and damage fund, and to ensure that when we eventually get the loss and damage fund, it should prioritize the safety of children. It should be invested in the safety of children. And my last words is endorsing the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is making the world safer and healthier for our children. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you. We have indeed heard you about the cyclones in Zimbabwe and how inaction led to detrimental consequences in the lives of children as well as others, and even how that led to you sitting down and addressing issues to do with working with silos, coming together, cooperating and collaborating to come up with ways in which you could address some of the issues that children faced during the cyclones. And you have talked about your call to action, and you have highlighted the integration of child health, mental health support in schools. You've also talked about proposition of funds and hazard mapping, strengthening coordination and collaboration. You have indeed emphasized on the issue of inaction and also action. Again, you've talked about policies, investing in data, and creation of harmonized frameworks, as well as you have called on the AU to come up with the treaties. Now, thank you very much. I want us to go to the question and answer section. And I'll begin also by asking a question, looking at our sub-theme, where we are looking at integrating child-responsive resilience in terms of mental health, in terms of nutrition, and also other aspects. And when we look at climate crisis or climate change, and talk about it being a crisis to the children's rights, it doesn't just begin when the child is born, right? It begins right from the time the mother is expectant or even before. And it affects the life of a child right from then. When we talk about nutrition, what does that, Gloria? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much to both the presenters. And I just want to tie up the two presentations and linking it back to your last slide on the call to action. And my question is basically very biased on the financing. And this is a question that I always ask myself, and whenever I'm in a room where issues of finances come up, I always ask, what is it that it's not being done, or what is it that we need to do differently to ensure the child sector is funded appropriately? And I always come back and ask this question of, for example, let's take an example of the health sector, like the Abuja Declaration, where the African Union is committing to a certain percentage to fund, the health sector. I like your last point about African Union committing to the forcible, something around that. So I think for me it's not a question, but something to think through. Do we feel we need to take it a little bit higher to a level where we have a declaration that for any African countries, then at least 5% of our budget to be directed on children issues? Because I feel we'll be in rooms, speak about, there's no funding, there's this, there's that, and we know how, children issues is multi-sectoral, but how can we then be deliberate in ensuring that at least there's something that is committing countries to really budget or finance towards children issues? And I think we can get our children to speak on that where a forum is provided. So I think for me that's something I feel we need to act for things to happen. Otherwise, we'll keep on crying and saying, children's sector is not funded, we have no funding. And looking at even the funding landscape that is happening at the moment. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Hadija. Pauline?
I wanted to comment to what she has said. and maybe not to take away from my colleague Gloria on the budgeting, because it also ties to the presentation I made. So one thing I forgot to mention is that we already have the how in terms of operational guidance on public spending for children. When you look at the global framework on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have general comment number 19 that specifically talks about public spending when it comes to child rights. So I think what we need to do, let me use an example of Kenya, because I'm Kenyan anyway. One of the things we really need to do is to operationalize or domesticate that general comment into our own policies, laws, and programs. In Kenya, we have the structure, the National Council for Children's Services. And one of the things they do, as per their functions in the Children's Act, is to advise the government on all matters related to the rights of children. All matters includes budgeting, spending, expenditure related to children. Civil society organizations can only do so much, and I know we've been doing so much, especially when it comes to advocacy, analyzing the budgets, and so on and so forth. So we already have that. Secondly, they just concluded Africa Climate Summit 2 that took place in Addis Ababa. For the first time, for those of you who might have participated in the inaugural summit that was here in Kenya, it took a lot of effort to just advocate for the inclusion of children when it comes to climate change issues. When you look at the declaration, the Africa Climate Summit 2 declaration, it has recognized children. The entire declaration, at least there are 4 times, there's been a lot of behind the scenes diplomacy, lobbying, advocacy, etc. So what we need to do is to make those declarations actionable. The Abuja declaration you're talking about, the 15% allocation, when you look at other global declarations on education, health, Global Partnership for Education, for example, talks about resourcing for education. So what we really need to do is to move from declarations in paper, but to make them actionable. And one of the ways to make them actionable is to work with the specific structures and systems in place in our own countries. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Pauline, for that input. There's another hand there.
Good morning, everyone. My question goes around the issue of a multi-sectoral approach. It has been seen in several presentations as a call to action. I'm thinking around issues to do with technology and how we appreciate how technology can be used, especially in early warning systems. So even as we consider the needs of children, and with the advancement of AI, artificial intelligence, how can we best utilize or use innovative ways using AI appropriately as a way of climate mitigation and in advancing these early warning systems? Also being cognizant of the fact that there's a rise on issues of technology-facilitated child abuse, so just safeguarding children, even as we empower them on the use of technology and the AI. Secondly, looking around issues of communities, and as we're thinking about the strength-based approach, working with communities even to just mitigate some of these issues and build up on their resilience. How can we use indigenous knowledge that has been used, or rather tapped in from these local communities, just to build that resilience, create more awareness, and also promote mental health, especially in cases or environments or scenarios, or we probably do not have a properly trained workforce to just deal with some of these issues. Because we understand that children go through what we term eco-anxieties, when they go through prolonged periods of either droughts or floods, emergencies that happen simultaneously that can really bring that issue of eco-anxiety. So how do we tap into our local communities structure? How do we use that indigenous knowledge just to promote issues of mental health awareness as we work towards climate mitigation and adaptation? Thank you. Is there anyone else? All right.
So thank you so much, Gloria. Mine is not a question, but a reflection and something that stood out from presentation. That as we think about climate change, climate crisis, and child protection, that there are two sorts of effects that children go through. There are those that will be visible and the invisible effects. Visible are easy to see and quickly move into to address. But the invisible one that she talked about, issues around anxiety, fear, or even trauma, it's something that you don't often see with children. And if it's not adequately addressed, then it has got lifelong effects on children. And to even think about it is that, like today, there are those children who experienced, for those of us from Kenya who experienced floods in Marakwet. So the experience was very traumatic. So now we will move in and do all kind of the response, including providing psychosocial support. But of course, it doesn't mean that the rain will stop. Come 2026, again, there will be periods and seasons of rain. Children like these ones, when they see rain, they will have the anxiety. They will start having that particular fear. At that point, floods might not happen, but already there is something that is happening into their mental well-being. And if it continues like that, of course, for them is fear because of the recurring climatic situations, are children actually who are in need of care and protection from a mental health point of view. So I think a big reflection that I pick from this session is that as we think about responding who are experiencing crisis, it's also doing some sort of a mapping to know what are some of these hotspots for the different kinds of climate crisis, and potentially even integrate programs that will provide psychosocial support, trauma-informed care to would be experiencing anxiety and fear because of the recurring kind of situation. So I think for me that was a comment, especially as we do programming, because then we have to be very practical as we think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Gloria.
Oh, no. There are so many questions. Much spent. Please be brief in your question. Just give her, but just be brief.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask. Thank you for the presentation. Murino Cheng from ICS. I'd like to just say that even as we speak about the effects of climate change and mental health for children, I'd like to just narrow it down and speak about, in the recent past, there's been a lot of conversations, particularly preparation, which is a responsibility that I believe is not for the government, but for everyone else. My key question, even as we have this conversation, because by the time we're speaking about response and mental health for children, the impact has already happened. The communities are already under distress. How then could we bridge the gap between as we do the early warning systems? You can already foresee drought, you can already foresee floods. What are we doing, or what could we do to bridge the gap between early warning systems and early action so that we don't get into the adverse effects of climate change? Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Just
That's
a quick
the
one.
last one.
As you were talking about just energy transition and the fossil fuel and prolific pollution treaty, pillars is just transition in the treaty. And I'm just asking, is there anything, or rather, have you done anything around knowing what models are working in just transition, especially with children, you know, at the forefront of that? Because there has been a lot of talk about climate and how do we move then into clean energy sources, and then how do we prioritize our children even while doing that?
Thank you. Let's allow her to answer those questions first, kindly, in the interest of time as well. If there are any questions remaining, you can reach out to her after this, kindly.
Thank you very much. everyone for the questions, and thank you for responding to Adija. So the first question was on nutrition insights around pregnant women and lactating mothers. So you asked about approaches that are likely to work, but before I respond with the approaches, I would want to put a disclaimer, because with each approach it's trying. It doesn't mean it really works, and if it works for case A, it doesn't mean it will work for case B. So for us, we were using the WHO Nature Care Framework. That's the World Health Organization Nature Care Framework, where and the whole of society ties pregnant women to be able to give the necessary support that ensures that pregnant women are supported mentally, they have access to support systems at community level. So it's about coming up with structures at society, at community level, that can be able to then provide the necessary support that is needed. If it's a drought, then it means you have to prioritize pregnant women when giving out food handouts. So I think that's what I can say on that, to ensure that the child is also not born with that mental distress that the mother was experiencing when she was pregnant. The question 2 was responded to. There was another question on the multi approach and how we can make use of AI. I think the choice or the onus is on us on how we would want AI to work for us. It can also be used positively to provide insights and support. We can have counselors support children online when they've been displaced and they are in camps. And with those camps, you can have AI providing counseling to the children. You also talked about indigenous knowledge systems, and I think I've talked about the whole of society where we involve everyone, the structures that are already with the community, and the systems that we used to use as a community, cultural lines that were already in existence. I'm not sure about the culture here, but in our context, we have the aunties, call them the tetes. So community aunties gather children, give them counseling, support them, provide trauma care, support so that children do not get into post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's trying to manage with what we have, with the resources that we already have, with the knowledge that we already have. Even traditional knowledge is also important. Thank you for highlighting that. There was a reflection on the visible and invisible effects. There was another question on how do we bridge the gap between the early warning systems and action. Outring foreign emergence, we are already bridging the gap. And by taking action, taking positive steps towards doing something or averting the adverse impacts of the disaster that is impeding, I believe we'll be bridging the gap. But if we learn that we have a disaster coming and we do nothing about it, or just knowing that we have done, and we know that this community is prone to these disasters, and we don't do anything about it, we are widening the gap. But when we begin to take positive actions to protect children then I think we are then bridging the gap. The last question was on how do we prioritize children in the just transition? I'm not sure if justice to that, but I believe that as communities, the less fossil fuels we use, the more impact we are considering our children. Because the damage we are causing today will have an impact on the children that will be born 5 years to come. So we understand that fossil fuels is one of the major causes of the crisis that we are in. So if we take action to stop the proliferation of fossil fuels, we are prioritizing the safety of children today and tomorrow. That will be my answer to that question. And I believe Kenya, I heard people saying Kenya is the, what were you saying? The capital of Africa. The capital of Africa. And as the capital of Africa, I think you are best positioned as a country to push this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you so much, Gloria. I want us to give her 5 factorial claps. So we start 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, go. The Kenyan one, Gloria. So once you go back to Zimbabwe, tell them that we gave some 5 factorial claps. Thank you so very much for a work well done. We are just about to go for a health break. Sam, believe so? So we are going for tea. I just want to take this time also to pray for the tea and then allow you to. But I also want to make one humble request as we come back. We are supposed to begin our first session, our next session at, is it 11? 11. So please let's keep an eye on our watches so that we are back to the auditorium at 11, but also humbly requesting that as we come back, let's please occupy the first 5 rows. We are just scattered all over and look so beautiful from here. So if you're able to, when we come, I'm just humbly requesting those who are from the back, where as we come in from our health break, kindly occupy the first 5 rows only, so that we look to be in one meeting and not in, I'm unsure if all of us are in this meeting, even those who are the very last row. So just to ensure that we are together and to have that harmony together, let's occupy the first 5 rows. Thank you. We want to pray. Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to go about the first morning session in our conference. And even in this last day of our conference, we are grateful for your grace and your mercy. And even as we go for our tea break, we pray that you bless the tea and the snack. Lord, as we partake of them, they shall be of benefit to our bodies. We give you praise and we thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You're free to go for tea?
Just need to announce, so tea is served right here. And there's also space right up. And yeah, okay. See you at 11.
to present a child-centered early warning system tool. Actually is done to give children an opportunity to participate using technology and to be able to contribute on issue of climate change. So purely, even the language, I complicated, actually simple for the child to go through it, understand what to do, and if possible, how to do it. Yeah, so as I said, I am a deputy director, and I head the strategic intervention for children in emergencies. And you know, emergencies has become like common in our country. It calls for anticipatory preparation, anticipatory action, so that necessary precaution can be taken on. This is the background of what is there, and you know, actually most of our areas, the ASOL, those are the arid semi, and we find a lot of droughts. So this simple model for children is actually innovated to address some of the issues in those regions, that is in the arids and semi-arids, which many times when this happens, suffer. In those areas, you'll find most of the staple food is milk. So anytime you interfere with the cattle, it means that you have food. To them, milk is not just milk to drink, it is a strength and also encourages them to continue. The innovation is called Punguza Ukame. Punguza Ukame is a Kiswahili meaning to reduce drought, and it is an anticipatory action seeking to change the story of the people from arid region suffering now and then. You'll find this innovation is trying to ensure that we turn around the story of every time being found and prepared. And that's why I felt it's good to have something for children themselves, gives the children the voice and a tool to share what they see and experience. So it's something which is actually within the children. Many times know the children, and it's very clear when you look at many of the recommendations from child participation. You praises children at the heart of resilience efforts, recognizing them as capable partners in building safer and more food secure in future. That means where the children are placed in this project is that they actually have a voice. Many times we discuss issues of climate change, but we don't bring the child at the center. In this innovation is trying to ensure the child is at the center and can control what to happen. We will be seeing shortly on how they do that. There is a goal. The goal is to develop an anticipatory child-centered early warning tool that allows learners to report. There is an issue of reporting done by children themselves to report daily milk consumption, because milk is their staple food. And time the milk goes down, it means the climate has changed and there is likelihood of a drought. Or else it means the cows have either migrated, or they have died, or they have dried up. And that's why it's very important to report. And this one will help the communities and government to respond quickly. So when they look at it, when they are feeding the data, they will know, and I will show how this one is true. Objectives are very simple, engaging, building a simple. It must be simple because it's for the child. Simple engaging tool within Frugumapa. So this will be using the Frugumapa, and when you download the Frugumapa from the Play Store, I know Mr. Ochieng is here, you'll find that it will give you a form, But the form which is in the Frugumapa is not the one which will be used here. This one has to be customized to be fed by children on just very serious and what they feel. So this one we are saying, the data has to be also come from the children. The other one is to translate children's report into visual dashboard that inform county and the national response. So what children are saying, it will just be seen in a dashboard. Assume you are in Wajir, the children in Wajir are feeding, and when my principal secretary is sitting at our office, she can see what is happening in Wajir. That's we call it a disparate action by children. The other thing is to strengthen local capacity for early action, reducing risk to children's well-being. Anytime the drought comes, you'll find that the health of children are compromised, the well-being is compromised. But when we have anticipatory action, it means that there will be a way of addressing that without a lot of risk. Our children will use Frungumapa. And remember, I had to use a simple language so that when children are following, they can even learn itself.
This meeting is being recorded.
In a kind of a place whereby children can also go and read themselves. Each morning, before the class starts, the learners take a few minutes to fill in a short digital form using the Frungumapa hub on tablets, all school. That's what will happen. If they go to for do anything, they are there. And with guidance from their teacher, they answer simple, child-friendly questions such as, did you drink milk yesterday? Very simple. Something which is not tiring their brains. Then where did it come from? Either we bought or from our animals. But remember, in Asal counties, the milk mostly comes from the animals. And that's why we are using the livestock to predict what is happening in the climate change. If not, why not? So something like that. The app uses icons, color codes, and easy buttons. So even a young learners can participate confidently. This actually makes our children be aware of climate change because they can see it and they are using the technology. And you know, with the generation we are in, technology is everything. So we have brought the technology to the children to address climate change. Each entry is automatically time-stamped and linked to the school, not to the individual child. This is to protect the privacy of the child. No child will be told that you ticked this, it's already protected. So there is also an issue of protecting the child on the hub, which is actually an online thing. This one, the child ownership and learning. Children will learn that by sharing what they observe at home. Children, they observe and they know. It's very simple. What they observe at home, they are helping their entire community. It's actually awakening a generation to come, a future generation on issue of climate change by seeing. And you find that teachers will use this activity to discuss topics like nutrition, self-education to children. It will also be able to teach on drought and caring of livestock. The process turns data collection into a lesson, empathy, awareness. Very interesting. When it's done well, children will like to feed it. And this one you find and teamwork. Over time, children will see patterns appear on class dashboard. There is a dashboard in class where they come and look. Oh, it is yellow. Oh, it is green. And it is actually makes them feel this is what they need to see. Green when most families have milk. Now then they see green. They know, oh, we have milk. All yellow when it is reducing. And red when men go without. It shows a danger. This danger is going up to the president to know that there is a danger coming from children on what? The visual approach helps children understand climate impact in real life, not just from textbooks. So they understand it's a practical thing all through. You find this one, data flow, it will secure system even in areas poor internet. Even where internet is not okay, the Frungumapa, you can feed it and it can
partner organization few real-time dashboards, not asking, not calling where you may not get. Every day you can see what is really happening. If you could or BRABRA, child protection officer, take action, immediate follow-up, such as nutritional support, feeding program, or community outreach. We are areas, it's the ASAL counties in Kenya. The ASAL counties are classified 23, but we have added 3 because of drought, the climate change to 6. But this one, Gia, Mandera, with plans to scale across drought-prone regions. So that can be. And why these regions? Is where the cattle are, is where the staple food is milk, and is where children would understand no milk, climate has changed. Why children matter? Children are natural observers. But sometimes we don't recognize them. We leave them in this topic of climate change. They see when the family cows stops producing milk, they know. When milks become smaller or when younger, simply it's forcing. By giving them a structured safe platform like through MAPA, the voices can become an early warning signal that saves lives. The approach nurtures responsibility, confidence, and sense of belonging because it is us doing it, so it is ours. Helping children grow into active citizens who understand their environment and their power to make change. Children are agents of change, and they cannot be when they are not exposed to what to make change in. So this particular innovation can trigger our children agents of change in the community. Expected results, early detection of food insecurity, child-led observation, fast and more timely response to emerging nutrition risks, strengthening collaboration among humanitarian. This now it is captured across. It looks at all the stakeholders. Stand resilience. So you can see children are at the center of the whole thing. The implementing partners, we are talking of the Ministry of Education, Agriculture and Livestock, county government, UNICEF and other NGOs, VAO, and the World Food Program. It's very important to know where we have the safety and welfare. Where the child now is placed at the center. At least now the child is at the center. And then it looks like this. When you talk about infrastructure and service, when it reacts with that is number 2. When it reacts with the child protection, when they intersect, there is some things which happen. And you'll find, if now the infrastructure, like actually I was in Marrakech for the landslides, you'll just get concerned on our engineers, whereby they don't even show people where to build the house, they don't even mind about what we call environmental impact assessment. That's what we are talking about, the infrastructure which will affect the child. When the climate change, the children will suffer. Some will even be put under the child labor or the GBV. But when now the climate intersects with the infrastructure, it will now lead to displacement because the structures will be drawn out. So these cycles are very important. And important because they can actually be a book by themselves. That one you can actually produce more than one if you want. But this intersection, that means we must work in a collaborative way as a teamwork to ensure no cycle is neglected. There was a topic here I listened when I was there, when people were wondering where to put the prominence as far as the budgeting. When my friend there, she was actually presenting powerful, and the people were wondering where to put the budget. That was the question.
Connecting emergency data and child participation in the process, that's quite innovative, I must admit. Like you said, we need a whole write-up on this, so I'll be inviting you as we prepare the journal to get a 5,000 word on this. Two questions, just 2 questions. Okay, one here, any other? Okay, 2, that's it, thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, very interesting. And look in some of the areas in education sector, we say the red districts, really, where there's a huge problem. Now, I'm wondering, like, for example, if I look at Garissa, enrollment rates for Garissa, it's there 2 out of 5 children are not in school, right? And I know you can't do everything, but I'm just wondering, many of those children who may not be in the formal education system are in DUPSIs or equivalent institutions. Do you have any plans to reach children where they are? Because when 2 out of 5 children are not in school, that's very, very worrying. Thank you.
Hi. I had a similar point in regards to the areas you've mentioned. I feel like electricity. There are cases of water and every other thing. So how will you actually collaborate with other partners to bring that on board? Because Mandera, for example, it can go 2 weeks to a month without any network. So are you actually aiming to empower those places, or rather just build, talking about first and then working with it?
Thank you. Thank you. The reason I put one recommendation, that is building a section, is because I was much aware of results. And you'll find that some of them will be left behind. And that's why the recommendation is it must be intersecting and it must be addressed. You cannot address only the climate change and you leave issue of infrastructure, because children are in those areas. And I really appreciate the question of children who are out of school. That means the government, of which also I represent today, should come up with the policies to ensure every child is in school. The safety and well-being, which was at the center, cannot be achieved if some of the children are not in school. Going back to what she's asking about the power, I met with somebody from energy. This one is very interesting, because if these innovations, they don't have a digital engine to do the work. So sometimes they may lack how to be used sometime. But the Frugumapa is so friendly, it is so simple, that even where we don't have network sometimes, it can still work. But I know it's a challenge, and that's why it was a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, Philip, we really appreciate taking your time. And some of you, if you're in the Forum for the African Child, for those operating in Kenya, you may have seen Philip respond to emergencies at midnight. I've literally called him at 11 and told him, oh, what's happening? And he will use his personal resources to do this. So I think the next conversation should really make sure that he gets enough money to respond properly. Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you. Great. So I think we'll immediately proceed to the next presentation, which is 2 workshops back to back. They'll request to be given a double portion of lunch because I'll be speaking almost throughout. So I'll be next, and I'll invite my colleague. So we'll try and do another 40 minutes or so that we don't take time from the next presenter, whom I believe there are a lot of people online waiting on how to make money. You remember I promised you, you will leave here rich. One is coming to talk to us about how to make money. Gatti, do you want to join me here? It's very scary when you're alone here, so please come and help help me reduce the stress. So good morning once again. So in the program it says we are going to have a workshop on sustainable funding, and we'll be doing this from two organizations' experience. So for those who have not been with me here, my name is Samuel Munyuing. I work with the African Institute for Children's Studies. Oh, today it's all over me. Yeah. Very briefly about who we are. We were founded in the year 2009 here in Kenya, and we've had registration in other countries, in South Sudan, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and 2021 in the US. Why were we formed? We were responding to a need to create a space where experts, communities, and young people in Africa can collaborate and create solutions on any matters that affect child welfare and well-being. So we really are a space for innovation, a space for, we have a platform of about 150 experts drawn across the globe, across Africa majority, and we work also with researchers at community level, young people. When you go to our website, you can see some of the innovative work by young people on that. So largely a knowledge management organization, turning knowledge into model interventions and policy work. We're privileged to be, part of the team started off because this is really what we intend to do. Before I proceed, I want to invite my sister to introduce herself and the organization.
Has an roles and mandates of the council, and actually that's where we derive our mandates as the National Council for Children's Services. I'm very glad to be with you here, and looking forward to a very, very interactive session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gati. For me, I'm really grateful that you're here. This is testament of how we want to, as not just the African Institute, but civil society. We want to see a very collaborative, complementary engagement between government and the non-state actors. Now, we'll organize this section into about 3. We'll do an introduction, basically trying to understand why should we have this conversation on sustainable funding. Then we'll go into discussing some of the models and how is it that you can be able to make funding sustainable. And last, we will look at the experience from Kenya on the Child Welfare Fund, which is in Section 12(7) of the Children's Act. Madam Gati will come and give us the experience of not fully done, it's not fully rolled out, but I think that would be a good one. I want to begin by this inspiration, hopefully it is, that African survival has always been local first. Okay, that through social capital, it's how it operates and not through a donor capital. There are some terminologies that are even difficult for some of our communities to have. What is the name of the children home in your community? Anyone can give me a name of your children home? Children's home. Anyone from Kikuyu community or from Malawi? Do you have a name? Children's home? In your tribal language? We don't have, right? I don't have from the Luo community. I don't have. Why? Because we've always had a social capital that has had a way in which to interact. You don't create a vocabulary for what doesn't exist, isn't it? So I just want to begin by really demystifying from the beginning that even as we talk about funding and all this, that historically, we've had ways in which we respond. Perhaps the question more would be, how do we structure better. Not, of course, ignoring that there's a lot of change that has happened. The community that raised me is not the community that is raising my children. But there are systems within us that can be built upon, and I think that's where we need to begin. I also strongly believe that, let me watch my time. I can be a preacher man, so I can preach the whole day. I'll try and do 10 minutes. I also strongly believe that where is it the rubber meets the road when it comes to human rights is financing, especially public financing. Any government that truly believes in the human rights, social protection, will put money on it, and you will see it in the taxes. That the way you manage things sustainably is through a rights-based approach. That every person has a right, you're not doing them a favor, and it should not take philanthropy and people being sufficiently philanthropic to get these things to done. So, that is my philosophical approach to this, and I want to believe most of you will believe in it. But if that's the belief, why are we talking this? I know it's about 8 months or so when we've seen a major shift on how public financing for welfare programs has changed. I think the world has never seen this. It is the first time in the last 60 years. I'm talking about 60 years referring to the period of President J.F. Kennedy and others who really stood out with the support from an evangelical group to say, you cannot be comfortable, feel rich, and don't take care of the other continents. Sometimes they were referred to as the dark continent. Let us go and save them. Is it a bad thing? Not at all. It is right that we should be able to think around your neighbor. After all, it's very human, isn't it? We get our completeness in knowing that you can respond to a need of your neighbor. And that led into creation of USAID. We went on to create the overseas development assistance structures, the UN, and all these structures. But it's not only USAID that has had a shift in the last 3-4 years. We are seeing the shift in the UK. We have seen the shift in Dutch governments. I'm looking for an example of a shift in the African governments. I'll be calling on my friend here, Dr. Michael Kiragu, because I work with him in thinking about models, to really ask ourselves, what is changing? But we also know that there is a greater appreciation of social protection programming and funding. And I think in Kenya we've seen government increase the amount of social protection funding that is coming in there. So, I would say it is really an opportunity for those of us in the Global South. For the first time, we've been given a space to recreate things by ourselves because what we've relied on has been taken away. So for me, I think the USAID freeze and a lot of changes that are happening, the cuts that have happened, and we felt it even in this, organizing this conference. You know, last time when we printed the book, conference booklet, it was bigger than what you have. But a very interesting thing is that the logos behind those, almost everyone, let me say 70% of those, had a way of going back to USAID. So that is how urgent it is that we must rethink this. Does it mean there are no children who need help? No. If you are religious like me and you read the Bible, Jesus said the poor will always be. So this is not going to change. So the question is, how do we finance so that we don't leave others behind? Because we know the cost of leaving people behind. And if you don't know, there are a lot of studies on what is the cost of not responding to the weakest person in the society. Now, child protection, unfortunately, has always had the least funding when you look at the cluster funding. You know, there's one of the development partners that I've known for a while. They're big donors even here in Kenya. I went back to their website, but I've seen they've pulled down their grant portfolio. But early this year, they had allocated about $800 million to climate change and only allocated 30 million to child protection. And it goes back to a question Mark had asked earlier on. Which is more important? But I think we are part of the problem that we've never been able to sell child protection to economists. What is the benefit of investing in child protection? Does it make the economy grow? If a politician came back during the campaign and told you, I supported 50 girls who had been defiled to go through psychosocial support, and the other one said, I supported 50 girls to access education, who is likely to receive more votes? But have we appreciated the impact of not responding to these 50 who have been defiled and are going through things? What happens to them when they become mothers, or wives, or teachers? We know the cycle of exploitation. Once exploited, the risk is higher that someone, if that trauma is not well dealt with, it comes through. So the significance of child protection, yet only 0.5% of global aid goes to child protection compared to humanitarian, health, water and sanitation programs. So because of that, it becomes very, very urgent that we must think around how to put money where it matters. And there's a lot of studies on the return on investment on responding in child protection and social welfare programs. Now, Sub-Saharan Africa, of course, has even a greater urgency in doing this. Why? Because more than 40% of our population are young people. It's the fastest growing child population globally. You know, there are countries that are now struggling to have more children because the age is really their problem. And we know that climate shocks, of course, make this even a greater challenge. So what are the drivers of funding gap? Why are we consistently having this problem of funding in child protection, even before we bring the problem of climate change? So I have a few points here. I think there are many more. Of course, a lot of people say so much now, but I want you to go do your own studying. One is the perception that child protection is a cost center. You know, it sucks money, it doesn't give back. You know, and it doesn't contribute to development. But you know, I've been challenging our teams, you know, even at the ministry level, and saying, if in the next 1 month we removed all the children who live and work in the streets in Kenya, what will be the impact of that? If I'm coming into the city as an investor, I have more confidence, isn't it? So it's likely to increase the investment that will happen. So we must shift that narrative and help decision makers, people in treasury, to see that investing in child protection actually gives you more benefit. I know it's not always true that those who've engaged in terrorism are always those who live in the street, but the risk of being recruited from the street to work with a terror organization, to go and bomb like we've heard of the Westgate, is very high, isn't it? So by not responding to these 5 children, you may have to respond to another 500,000 people because you did not do it. Fragmented government planning and unclear mandates is often a challenge. You know, limited domestic philanthropy and tax incentives. And let me give you a quick example there. As an organization, African Institute for Children's Studies has a non-profit side, but we also have a consulting side, which is a social enterprise. There are times we've allocated, we do that actually, 10 to 20% of our net annual income, we support an education fund. Sometimes I've tried to move money from our consulting arm to the non-profit, And the accountant will always ask the invoice, what are you paying for? Number two, I must pay value-added tax. I'm like, I'm trying to help out. But think about this. What about if we created a tax incentive, the same way the US, I think Poland have done this, that for every money you give for social good, you can reduce it in your tax and see the impact immediately. Stress within families. It leads to separation. And so